like I said, being the first Inspector General for Maine was just interesting. I remember General Tinkham at the time, who was a tag. You were the first one, so when you inspect, be easy.
Yeah.
So I remember, okay, I'm gonna go and inspect, 4 or 5 units, and I'm only gonna look at weapons qualification and PT. And I remember going to this one company, and I'm like, you have like 5 guys here that haven't qualified in 5 years. And the answer was, sir, they're out there hunting moose right now. They're good shots. They can really get that moose from a long distance. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way.
Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is James Piggot, Cullum number 43570. We'll hear about Jim's state record-setting discus throws and his inspection policies as Maine's first Inspector General. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any government organization, most particularly the City of St. Augustine, Florida. Jim Piggot, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I appreciate you having me.
Now, it's such a pleasure having you on because, like we were talking about just before we started, that you and I didn't get a chance to hang out at the Academy, so we're kind of starting fresh together.
Yeah, this is my first time really hanging out with you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll show everyone we'll show everyone how much fun it is and how easy it is. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about the grandbaby. So we just kicked off. We're going to kick off with family because you just have a brand new addition. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
We have a brand new addition. He was born on Wednesday. His name's Parker, and he's my second grandson. The first one is Carson. Carson James. Carson James was named after me with James, and Parker Gregory is after his other grandfather. So it's really, really cool.
That's fantastic. And you're in Florida now.
We are. We're in St. Augustine, Florida. Worked with the city. I know we'll probably get to that, but this is our final retirement. Both kids are in the area, so we're planning on staying here for a while.
Both kids and now 2 grandkids within 20 minutes drive, I understand.
Yes. Yep.
So if the question were to come up, what are you going to be doing with your time over the next, say, 5 to 8 years? I think we're all pretty clear what you're going to be up to.
Well, yeah, my wife and I, we both officially retired a year ago this past May.
Okay.
And so we're in the retirement phase. There's 3 phases we were told of retirement: the go-go phase,
yeah,
the slow-go phase, and the no-go phase. Well, we're in the go-go phase. So we have a cruise planned almost every month.
Oh,
Plus,
wow.
we watch our grandson, well, now grandkids, but we've been watching our first grandson once or twice a week when we're back in town. And that keeps us busy.
So talk about that a little bit, because we're at the time of recording, we're 60 years old. Our class, an average. Some of us have retired, some haven't. Talk a little about kind of how you approach retirement. You just obviously gave some phases of it. Just talk a little bit about your thinking on it.
Well, like I said, I actually retired from the military in 2006, 21 years, because I had 1 year at the prep school, which counts toward retirement, which is great. And then I got a job with the City of St. Augustine down here in Florida, where I live now. The city manager at the time, his dad had graduated from West Point back in like 1962.
Right.
And he always held West Point graduates, in high reverence. And he wanted to have, his dad kind of pushed him to have a West Pointer come in as one of their directors. And I happened to see the job opening when I was stationed in Maine for an opening down here as the Director of General Services. I applied. I flew down the morning after Super Bowl in 2006 and got up like 2 a.m, flew down here for an interview and stayed here till the next day, then flew back. And I guess I did well enough where he decided to hire me.
And what was the role when you started?
With the city, I was the Director of General Services, which in military terms, I would call that the Support Battalion Commander.
Okay.
Where I have a little bit of everything that people don't want. I had human resources, I had purchasing, I had the warehouse, I had the mechanics, I had the carpenters, I had the
Right.
visitors information center, and believe it or not, they gave an Army guy the city marina. So I
There you
had that
go.
as well.
So they basically said, let's put all the things that nobody wants to do in one job and then hire a West Pointer to come do it.
Basically, yeah. And it was kind of funny when I first came in. The guy who was temporarily holding the position, there was two people that they wanted to get rid of, and they waited till I get down.
Yeah.
And so I had to find reasons, which I did easily, to get rid of them. So it's not that I said you're gone, but
Right.
it's like the military. You need to have backup for every single case like that. But yeah,
Good.
it was kind of fun.
That's the human resources equivalent, and we've all experienced it, where they ask for volunteers and everyone steps back and you're just standing there, right? So you're it.
Yeah, we step back and push our other friends forward. You got it.
And then what was it like going from Maine to Florida? I mean, you're from New York originally, but what did you ever plan on living in Florida, or was just that was where the job was?
That's where the job was. I said we retired in 2006, and my last duty was in Maine. I was the first state inspector general for the Maine National Guard. Every other state in the United States had an inspector general but two. I can't think of the second one. And they were usually full-board colonels, but since I was a lieutenant colonel at the time, and it was a small National Guard, they put me in that position. And that was an experience. I went up there kicking and screaming, didn't want to go up there. We wanted to go to Washington, D.C., because we knew we were going to retire
Right.
after that tour. And we left Maine kicking and screaming, didn't want to leave.
Beautiful.
Wanted to look for a job up there, couldn't find a job. The economy was on the downspin at that time. And I told you how we came down to St. Augustine with that job opening.
Yeah. Okay. And then what was the first thing you noticed that was super different about living in Florida?
The heat. It is hot here 8 months out of the year.
Yeah.
Then 2 of those months are like spring and fall, and then it's just average weather in like December, January. But the heat,
right.
you just run from AC to AC, and then you have hurricanes, which
Right.
when my wife and I lived in Oklahoma, we have tornadoes.
Right.
Where you have like 2 minutes to take cover. Here you have like 8 days to decide what type of reaction do you want to take.
8 days to sit and worry.
Yes, yeah. And with the city, I couldn't really go anywhere because I had all the support folks that had to get the city closed and then reopened. So
talk about what it's like being in the administration of a city and a hurricane's coming. What is that like? Is it a well-oiled machine because they're so experienced at it, or is there a bit of chaos every time?
well, we are now a well-oiled machine. Our first hurricane was Hurricane Matthew, which occurred, and it was supposed to have been on the day in 2016 that my daughter was going to get married. The one that has my two grandsons. And that hit, and we had to push everything back one day. That's a long story, too. We had people coming in from out of town. We had a sit-down dinner planned. We had about 1/3 the people there, and we had a barbecue instead, not a sit-down dinner. But the day itself turned out really, really nice. Like the day after hurricane is gorgeous.
Right.
Not a cloud in the sky.
Okay.
And but going back to the city, that was our first one, and we had a fairly new city manager at the time, and he was kind of all over the place, and there were some of us on the director's level that were trying to calm him down and stuff, and
Yeah. Right.
he was going around and telling people that make sure you write your social security number on your arm so people can identify the bodies afterwards, and trying to get some ice trucks so we can put bodies in there and so on and so forth. And I'm like, John, I don't think you really need to do that.
Don't lead with that.
Yeah.
Don't lead with the bodies and the ice and the trucks. Just
And I sat in one of his speeches after the fact, and he was telling the people, this is what we were doing. And I'm like, you don't want to say that, John. You don't want to say that.
That's not a good. That's not a good PR strategy.
No. And I, it's the first one that hit St. Augustine since like 2004. So this is 12 years later. He wasn't there. I wasn't there.
Right.
St. Augustine, if you don't know, is the oldest city in America right now. And a lot of the drainage is built in 1565 when it first started. And it floods. Every king tide, the streets flood. But we had a lot of damage during that hurricane. Houses flooded and so on and so forth. And then Irma hit a couple of years later.
Yep.
And the same houses flooded again. And, it's thank goodness for us, the other Helena took place on the West Coast. But, those folks over there, send prayers for them because they need it. And especially the folks in Asheville. I got a couple of friends in Asheville, and they're encapsulated right now with water with only one way in and one way out. So it's tough.
Yeah, it's getting reports from classmates from all over about the path of that one.
Right.
And so you started as the support battalion commander of the city, and was that the role you've had the entire time, or did you move up?
Nope, that's the role I had the entire time.
Okay.
I got there in 2006. Yeah. John Regan, who was our city manager, was kind of my sponsor. Uh-huh. And I remember I got there and he showed me around after my interview, and this is when I got up at 2 a.m, flew down, and he goes, I'm next in line for city manager. And I'm like, I don't want to be city manager. I'm going to be here for 17 to 20 years, and I plan on retiring.
Yeah.
But so, I stayed in that job, which was kind of neat. After a while, it's the same thing every year. It's kind of like Groundhog's Day.
You have to do budgets, I imagine. Like each year, you've got to anticipate costs and things like that, right?
Every year, we have to do budgets for the directors. It starts in May and it ends in September. Yep. October 1st is our beginning of our fiscal year. We also have evaluations in there. Different than evaluations in the military. If you remember, for OERs at least, I do. You can only put so many top block, second block, third block, and so on and so forth. Here, people have a hard time telling someone what they need to hear.
Yeah.
And I was probably one of the tougher evaluators that was in the city. And unfortunately, their evaluation is tied to money. Yeah. But basically, the way they handled that was everybody got a two-step, which was like a 2% increase in their pay based on their evaluation.
Right.
Only those folks that really did something horrendous would get less than 2.
Right.
Plus, St. Augustine, I'll let you know, is a small city, 15,000. And the one thing I learned is everybody knows everybody of the locals. So,
and how did it change in those years from 2006 to now? How did it change? Did it grow larger? Was there a lot of development, or was it pretty stable?
There's a lot of development, and St. Augustine, all the free land has pretty much been taken up.
Right.
So people are building buildings higher rather than wider or more land, because we're just strapped for land. And the one thing I'll say, when I first moved down here, I was a Yankee. Now I'm a damn Yankee because I moved down here and stayed. But we've had so many people recently, in the last 3-4 years, move down from New York State, from Connecticut, from California.
Sure.
Moving down to Florida. St. Johns County is the county we live in. Has the best school district in the entire state. So people really look to St. Johns County to come down, move, and live in.
Yeah. It means you all have done a good job managing the area.
Yeah.
If it's an attractive place to come. Well, let's go back in time to
Wappinger Falls.
Wappinger Falls, New York.
Yes.
Talk about growing up in Wappinger Falls and kind of a young Jim Piggot.
Well, I grew up on a vegetable farm. My dad was a teacher, so teaching wasn't, 12 months of the year. So in order for us as a family to make ends meet during the year, we had to do something else. So my dad had always started growing vegetables, and we had a small vegetable stand right next to our back door. And then we built a farm market with a parking lot and everything, freezer, cooler, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it just went on from there. And my brother and I have one brother, that's it. We both worked there our entire lives. And when I was 18, I submitted my letter of resignation and went to the West Point Prep School.
Oh, you went to the prep school?
I did.
So you were not unaccustomed to physical labor as a young man?
No. My brother and I, we used to get up to my dad playing Reveille in the morning at 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we'd have to get up, go out, pick corn, tomatoes, potatoes. I mean, we sold a whole bunch of different types of vegetables that we had to pick, clean, and sell ourselves.
I grew up on a little bit of acreage with such vegetables. We didn't have a stand or anything, but I know my way to how to weed a cornfield. Let's put it that way, a young cornfield. It's always a little bit different for those of you who grew up in the Poughkeepsie. Wappinger Falls is near Poughkeepsie, right?
Right.
So it's always
actually a Poughkeepsie address, but Wappinger Falls is closer to where I lived.
Got it. Okay.
Which is 45 minutes above West Point.
45 minutes above West Point is where you grew up. And for those of you that live there, it's a little bit different because it's just the academy looms large in that area. So what got you interested in West Point, given the fact it was 45 minutes south of where you grew up?
Well, actually, my older brother got me interested because he was a football player, a better football player than I was. And he applied, and he met with, I believe, the coach and stuff, but his grades were better than mine as well.
Okay.
But he didn't get in, and he was not accepted. And when I was a junior, spring of my junior year, my track coach, said, "Hey, you may want to consider West Point." I'm like, I have no chance. My brother's grades were better than mine. Why should I try it? But then my senior year, I set the New York State record in the discus.
That kind of helped.
I don't know if you remember Al Order. He was 4-time Olympic gold medal winner. I beat his New York State record, and by that time, West Point was really interested in me in track. Yeah,
that generally tends to draw the attention. The old state record.
Yes. So I couldn't get in right away. No surprise there. So I went to the prep school for a year, which was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey.
So how did you start throwing the discus? What was the story there?
My brother did football, track and discus all throughout, and I all throughout his junior high and high school seasons. Mm-hmm. And that I started in junior high school and high school, and it just took on from there. And
did you play football as well?
I played football as well, yes. Yeah. And funny thing is, when I was at the prep school, I played football at the prep school too. And I was a tight end, more of a blocking tight end. And this is before Jim Young came in as a coach. And at that time, I forgot who was the coach before Jim Young. Homer Smith, maybe? I don't remember. But they were more of a passing team, and I was more of a blocking tight end. Right. And when I was at the prep school, that coach was fired, and they brought Jim Young in. And they wanted to know if I wanted to play because I was more of a blocking tight end that would fit the scheme that he was moving to. Yeah. And my track coach said, if you do that, you're not going to go to Hawaii with us in the springtime for our spring trip, for a track meet. And as a plebe, I'm like, I'm going to go to Hawaii.
Boy, that was a clever one. We weren't so bright back then. He knew how to play it.
No.
Being a prepster, I guess that prepared you for, not fully for our day, but you kind of knew what was coming when you went to our day and Beast, right?
Yeah, our day was actually very, easy. I won't say easy. It was not as difficult as I expected it to be. And I remember when, as you remember, our day you go through, you had your tag,
Yeah.
you had to get all the stations, and I had finished all the stations, and they said, okay, go to your room. So I went to a room, and I'm just sitting there, and I put my stuff away,
Yeah.
according to the barracks arrangement guide, the BAG, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to lie down here. So I laid down on the bed, which was a wrong decision, because my squad leader came in, and she was yelling at me up and down, and she said, well, put your stuff away, and I'm like, I did. And she says, well, put your roommate's stuff away, and I'm like, he's not here yet. And so right then and there, my roommate came in,
Right.
and so I helped him put his stuff away.
Right. She
So
knew
that
you
was
were
kind of
wrong
funny.
somehow, but she had to work through a list to figure out how wrong you were.
Yeah, and what else? What can I do now? Type thing. That's kind of one of my funny plebe stories, and I remember my friend. I don't know if you know Stan Olson. And we were good friends at the prep school, and I remember talking to him during, I don't know, the ice and cookie thing or whatever.
Right.
And he was telling me he was so hungry that he took some bacon. You remember how it was served on bread to absorb the grease, and put it in his back pocket so he could bring it back to his room to eat. And coming back to the room, there was a big oil stain on his back pants and different things. And
yeah, that doesn't work out so well. Well, best laid plans.
Yeah.
C1 is a plebe. That's over on the tougher end of the Corps, right?
C1 is a plebe. Go Cobras.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it as a plebe. I had two roommates, Ed Motley and Rainier Filippona, who had left after his plebe year.
Right.
And I kind of lost contact with him. I know he was from Alabama. And I'm friends with Ed on Facebook. But the funny thing was, when I went back to West Point, after I left Fort Polk, Louisiana, I was the assistant S1 for USCC.
Oh.
And the tactical officer for C1 was relieved because he got in a fist fight with his neighbor, and the cops were called. So they were looking for a replacement, and they put me in as the TAC for C1. So I got to see kind of both sides of it, which was kind of neat.
So you were the TAC for your old company?
For my old company for a year. And then they said, well, you did a good job. You want to go to the Tactical Officer Educational Program, the TOEP program.
Yeah.
And I said, sure. I free master's degree. The Army was going to pay for it. So I went to the TOEP program after having 7 or 8 months experience as a TAC, which was a unique experience, and came back, and they put me in G1 as the TAC.
Huh.
After that year of getting my master's. And I became the TAC for G1 for a year, and then I became the first Reg XO for my final year.
Well, what is something that you do as a TAC that cadets don't even really realize?
Oh, there's so much. This is a while ago now, so we're talking.
A TAC is a very mysterious thing. They're always down the hall. There's some officer that shows up, and most of your experience is other cadets, right? But what was that like?
Yeah.
I mean, what's an element of that we didn't really understand?
There's a boatload of paperwork that you got to do. There's a lot of meetings you got to go to. There's trip sections that you got to put together and maybe be the officer in charge of that trip section. There's just, you got to worry about parades and so on and so forth.
Right.
And if you want to, there's nothing that says you can't. I also helped. I went back to the track team, and I was an assistant coach for the throwers.
Oh, there you go.
So I was an assistant coach there for 4 years.
Huh. There you go.
So the plate's full if you want it to be full.
Right. And if you're not getting in a fist fight with your neighbor.
Exactly. Exactly. That's not a good thing to do. Right. Learn that lesson from day one.
Although you're a big fella, if I saw you coming, I think I'd moderate my views.
But it's kind of funny because you remember in the Army, soldiers try to get over on everything that they do. Try to take the shortcuts, and the cadets are the same way. I mean, I'm sure we were the same way.
You
And
were the same
they
way.
think they're pulling a fast one over you. And I'm like, I've seen that before. Matter of fact, I tried to do that before. It doesn't work that way.
Right. I just
Yeah.
remember our TAC kind of smiling and laughing and shaking his head because he'd seen it all, right? He was not a grab, but he was very wise in the ways of soldiers, and so he'd catch us on all kinds of nonsense. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so as an upperclassman, you went to F4.
Went to F4. And I had
What was that like going from first reg over to the fourth reg?
um it was, I won't say it was difficult. Same experience that you had. You had to get to know the new classmates that you have in your class. You're no longer a plebe, so you don't have to walk along the walls and stuff. And I lived in the divisions, so there was 4 rooms on a floor and 4 floors with 3 or 4 divisions. I was, lucky enough to have some really good roommates. John Magnus was one of my roommates for 3 semesters. I had, a couple other really good roommates. Terry Boylan, the comm, his daughter was in our company.
I knew Terry and I surfed together the 24th.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And my parents living so close, they had season tickets for football. When I was living in New York, when I had graduated from high school, my parents had season tickets, and my brother still has those tickets to this day.
No kidding.
But they used to come down, and we used to have tailgates, which were great, except for one of them. When we played, I think it was Boston College, as a night game.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't supposed to drink before the game. But the people that my parents came down with, they've served some, in a small Dixie cup, spiked apple cider.
Right.
And at the time, we didn't know it was spiked. But we did a cheers, and we drank, and you could taste the spiked in it part. And another friend of mine, Lou Irwin, who was in my company, his girlfriend and he had a fight about another guy who was there, not a cadet. And he didn't like that, the other guy, so he called Greg Stone, who was our tactical officer, and says, Lou Irwin said this and did that. And he goes, I would have too if you were hitting on my girlfriend. Did you know they were drinking?
Oh.
And so
Jim.
instead of having a witch hunt, there was like 12 or 13 of us that turned ourselves in.
Yeah.
And I got to walk the area.
How many hours did you get for that little adventure?
I think it was 15 or 20. I don't remember.
Okay. Well.
But it got rescinded. Well, I walked for maybe 10. And the one thing that I regret is that was the only Army-Navy football game I would have been able to go to because we had track meets on the other games.
Right.
So I had to do the boomerang option, go to the game and come right back, and I had to walk the area.
Well, I got to tell you, 15 hours for Lou's honor, that's worth, or his honor with his lady, that was worth it.
Oh yeah, it sure was. And 13 of us, we just went there and said we all had a sip of that.
We all did it, yeah.
And
well, that's a good thing. So talk about being on the track team. You're there 4 years of track, core squad, all the rest. What was that experience like? What were some of the interesting meets you went to? Talk about being a noted member of the track team.
Well, the Navy meets are always interesting. You don't get, I don't think, the real gist of the Army-Navy experience, maybe unless you're on a core squad team or a rugby team that's not core squad or something to that nature. Because I remember, all the throwers went to the sports psychologist at West Point before the meet to get our minds right. And we got to sit on heavy tables where we got a serving and a half of food. Because I remember when I went through Beast Barracks, I got yelled at for a big bite. I had 3 peas on my fork instead of 2. And I had lost 18 pounds during Beast Barracks, and my track coach was pulling hair out of his head. And they put me on a heavy table. I sat with a cross-country team at that time, and I was eating their food left and right and everything. But
Well, I mean, your sport. Literally, you needed the muscle to get that thing going, right?
I needed the weight and muscle. I came in at like 206, which isn't really big.
Right.
And I was down to like 180 something.
Right.
Which was really, really small. And I graduated, I think, 249.
Right.
Just lifting weights and everything else. But had terrific track coaches. Wayne Durgan was my coach twice. In between him was a guy named Rob LaSorsa. And an interesting story with that, he graduated from Springfield College in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. And
he was on the track team with my brother.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of a unique thing. But yeah, we were really, really tight. The men throwers and the women throwers.
Yeah.
We had a brotherhood and sisterhood, if you would say.
So what was your favorite meet that where you really just, you look back and say, that's the one where I really got on it?
I think it was my senior year Navy meet. We had a really, really good shot putter. I threw my personal best. I got second place. He got first place, but Navy got third place. So that's probably where we, culminated to our full potential.
And first year is a good year to do it.
Yes, for sure. Set the example for the young folks that are in there.
Well, busy life going around. What did you study? What was your course of study academically?
I was a words guy and not a numbers guy. And human resource management was my field of study. Like I said, my grades in high school weren't very good. That's why I went to the prep school. I finished closer to the bottom than I did, like Mike Pompeo did to the top. I was probably, 17, 20 from the bottom. My wife always kids me because
if we were all like Pompeo, there'd be no balance. So we need guys like us to balance it out.
I came that close of getting the silver dollar from everybody. So
really,
but I'm glad I didn't want to wait and get that close to everybody.
So what kind of things did you study in human resource management at the academy back in the 80s? That's interesting. I didn't even know that existed. So talk about what that was like.
Me neither. Oh, you're asking me something that I got to put my memory on. It was a lot of leadership type classes, not just PL 300, but there's some other leadership classes there,
right?
That we had to take. Did you have, what was yours? Did you take philosophy when you were a cadet or no?
I took the basic one that we all took.
Well, I took the next level as well, and didn't do very well in that. And I swear to this day that the P didn't like me. Course squad athlete, instructor, so I had to go to summer school or STAP.
Oh, you did for the second level philosophy.
Yeah, and I turned out a B+ in that class.
It's not that Aristotle was hard, is that the P didn't like you?
The P didn't like me, and I think he turned out to be the CG for the 25th Infantry Division.
Right. What does that guy know?
Yeah, exactly. And it was funny in summer school, they were asking questions, and I gave them the same answer I gave my other P. He goes, "Yeah, that's it." I'm like, "Well, that's what I said before."
So you did a little STAP time.
Did a little STAP time too.
And
I said,
did a little STAP time. You had a good experience. Come on, Jim.
Hey, I had the area tours. I had the STAP time. I had the Corps Squad time. I had the cadet time. I marched in a few parades.
When did you know it was artillery was your branch? When was that clear?
Well, one, I didn't have a lot of choices because of my class standing. Mm-hmm. And then two, I said, why walk when you can ride? So I went self-propelled field artillery.
Okay.
Which was great. I mean, I kind of paying for it with my hearing right now.
Yeah,
I'm doing fine. We were like, I don't need to wear earplugs. I can't hear when people are talking to me. And walking from gun to gun on the gun line as a lieutenant and so on and so forth, it gets really, really loud when the guns go off. But it's something I would not want to take back.
Now, if I remember my conversations with our artillery classmates, it's quite mathematical, and you got to calculate make different calculations so the guns are accurate, things like that. How did you find that part of artillery?
my very first job was a fire direction officer. And we had everything that we did, we had to know what we called charts and darts.
Right.
And you learn that in OBC. And it's probably the most interesting method of firing that I've ever, encountered. I'm like, how does this work?
Right.
And the biggest thing was there was a couple times where you can pull into a firing position at nighttime when there's no clouds, lay the guns into position, and you could shoot off the stars.
Oh, wow.
And you could still be very accurate, and that's without the charts and darts.
Yeah.
But also coming in was what we call the BCS, the battery computer system.
Right.
Where a fister or a forward observer can laze a target, and that would go right to the computer system and automatically go right to the guns. And that was so amazing. When you had that working fine, you could be within 3 or 4 feet where the round lands to where you wanted it to land, if not on the target.
Yeah, right on. What was your first assignment? I mean, with your class standing, you probably had fewer choices than you would have liked, but where'd you end up?
Went to Germany.
Germany, okay.
And we had a great time. I was stationed in Kirschgowens, which I think is a housing community now.
Yep.
Lived in Bootsbach with a roommate who was the second oldest second lieutenant in the Army.
What's the story there?
Well, the first oldest second lieutenant in the Army was also in our battalion. But my roommate, John Jones was his name. And after he left Germany, he went to Ranger School and won the Tex Turner Award for the toughest Ranger. And then he went to Special Forces School. And so he was SF. And his area of concentration was Thailand and that area over there.
Right.
So he's interesting. We're still pretty good friends. He comes down to St. Augustine once in a while. And,
yeah.
Right now, he's probably like 69 or 70 because he was a
he's
fairly
the
old
oldest second lieutenant in the Army. So,
yeah.
Now he's and then, so you serve your time there. Now, how about when did you get your family going and get married? At what point in your career did you meet your lovely wife and get that all going?
We, going back to Germany, I was there for 3 years. I left 2 or 3 months before the wall came down.
Okay.
Went to advanced course and got there like in November, I'm thinking. Met my wife. For those artillery folks there, I'm sure they know of a bar in Lawton named Girdlestones. Met my wife in Girdlestones.
Okay.
And I met her in January. Got engaged in June. Got married in December. So it was a quick turnaround. When you know, you just know.
Right on. And where's she from originally?
She's from, I met her in Lawton. She was working in a doctor's office there.
Okay.
But she born and grew up in Philadelphia, near Philly.
There you go. All right.
And went to Fort Lewis, Washington after that.
Okay.
There is a God, beautiful place up there. It was Fort Lewis and McCord Air Base before they joined them. And I was there for 3 years. I first put on the 9th Infantry Division patch on my shoulder.
Right.
And then the 199th Brigade motorized patch on my shoulder. And the last year when I was a battery commander, I put on the 2nd ACR patch.
Really?
And I was caught in the BRAC move. And I was responsible for moving my entire battery and her family down from heaven to hell.
That's I heard about this move. It caught a few people.
To Fort Polk, Louisiana. And nothing was ready. They said the rooms would be ready, this would be ready, that would be ready, everything. Soldiers were showing up with no one to hand out sheets and stuff from the battery. Our battery, we had sheets, so I was handing sheets out to soldiers from other batteries. Our room was a junior enlisted room. And that's our neighbors were the Doziers, Craig Dozier, who you had on one of your
Dozier was talking
podcasts.
about that Fort Polk experience.
Yeah. We got to be pretty good golfers because there's nothing to do in Leesville.
Right.
And so on weekends, Craig and I would go golfing, and him and Marcia would go out and go shopping to the Super Walmart in DeRitter.
Right on. And how long were you there, and what year in your career was the end of the Fort Polk experience?
I was there exactly 365 days
Okay.
and got out as soon as I could. You had to be there a year and
Yeah,
went to
yeah.
West Point. And
Okay, that
that's
was
where I
when you went up
became
to
the
the academy and were the
right,
assistant one. Okay, that's why.
which was interesting too. Being from New York State originally, we
Yeah.
got up there in June, and because I was there for 6 months, I had to pay the entire year of New York State taxes.
Right. Well,
And I'm like,
how they get.
that's when I changed my home of residency.
Now, was there? Was you still have family around when you were back at the academy? So 45 miles north, or what was the
Yeah,
situation?
I did. I had my mom and dad and my
Okay.
brother and his wife.
They didn't get you out there
And
in the vegetable patch, did they? I hope not.
they did. On weekends when I went up there, on weekends, I remember we
Right?
came down
You
from
never
Maine
quite
one
get
time.
out of the vegetable patch, Jim. You never quite get out of the
Well,
vegetable patch.
no, you don't. Or farm work. We came down from Maine one year after our first year up there. I came down for a short vacation,
Right.
and my dad says, "I'm great. I'm glad you're here. I need to put a new barn roof on the barn." Dad, this is my vacation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But went there and helped put a new barn roof on the barn.
Yeah. There you go.
It's never a dull moment. But when we lived in Fort Lewis, he came out there after Judy and I were married, and we had a dog, and the dog chewed part of a wooden arm, separating the kitchen from the dining room. A shelf, if you will. And so I know he was a woodshop teacher, and I said, "Dad, I got something for you to do. Fix this."
What's it all Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Moon song? You just flipped it back on him and said, "No, I got something
Exactly.
for you to do." I love that.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And so from the West Point all the way out, what was the path out toward your retirement in 2006 in the Army? What other kind of roles did you have?
Well, after West Point, I went to Korea for a year, and my wife and kids at that time stayed at West Point.
Okay.
Went to 5 miles north of the border between North and South Korea. I worked in the G3 Plans Department, part of 2nd Infantry Division. I worked inside a mountain. If you ever saw that TV show Get Smart, where he walks through 3 or 4 doors.
Yeah, that's kind of
get in there.
a thing.
That was exactly what we had to walk through. Came back a year after that and went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And I was part of the 212th Brigade, Artillery Brigade. And I had 2 phenomenal brigade commanders. I was the Brigade S1, and this is where my West Point College, human resources kicked in. Colonel Willis and Colonel Blum. And Colonel Willis was a great guy, super guy. And every time we went out for a field exercise, we'd have a plan. And he'd always come up and say, "I got a great idea. Let's add this." This is after all the plans are out. Right. "I got a great idea. So we called that the G-Phil. Great effing idea. And our Brigade S3 at the time says, "I'll take care of that. I'll slow him down a little bit."
Right.
And then he changed command, and I stayed there, and Colonel Mark Blum came in. Great guy, super guy. We just really had a good mesh going on. The one thing I remember with him was he said, "Jim, I got to tell you, for our staff meeting, because we had all the battalion commanders there and the staff, I got the mind of a kindergartner. After an hour, I just lose my concentration and I got to leave. First meeting, an hour came up and he got up and he walked out. Every other meeting after that was 1 hour long."
Well, he had the presence of mind to know that and give you a heads up, right?
Oh, yeah. No, he was great, and got to see him after, or technically after I left, but I was waiting to drive out the next day. He came over to the small housing place that I was staying my last night, and came over with his wife, and we had a great time. So a lot of respect for Colonel Blum.
So what was your last job in the Army? Because I always find these last jobs are always the interesting.
Yeah, after that job, which is after 9/11, like I said, I really wanted to go up to D.C. because I knew it was probably my last tour. and so I can look for jobs and get my foot in the door someplace.
Right.
And PersCom said, "Sorry, we're going to move you to Maine.
Main job. That's
We're
right.
going to make you go up there and be an inspector general." And I said, "I don't want to go to Maine."
Yeah.
Well, that's where you're going. And that's the only time where we really had a disagreement with PersCom where I wanted to go to.
Right.
Other than the BRAC move, I had no choice with that. So I went to Maine as the IG school, Maine, and I was there for 4 years. And like I said, being the first inspector general for Maine was just interesting. I remember General Tinkham at the time, who was a tag up there. He was like, "Jim, be easy on us. You are the first one, so when you inspect, be easy."
Yeah.
So I remember, okay, I'm going to go and inspect, 4 or 5 units, and I'm only going to look at weapons qualification and PT,
Right.
just to make sure everybody is,
Thinking that was something that could be.
yeah. And I remember going to this one company, and I'm like, "You have like 5 guys here that haven't qualified in 5 years." And the answer was, "Sir, they're out there hunting moose right now. They're good shots. They can really get that moose from a long distance." And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. So, but things got better. And then, obviously we were in the Iraq War at that time. And,
Yeah.
so my major jobs switched from inspections to getting the units ready to deploy.
Yeah.
Overseas. And they deployed quite a few units, and I think we had like 4 or 5 casualties from the Maine Guard folks
Oh, wow.
up there. And the Sergeant Major at the time, Sergeant Major Small, is now retired, and he's down here living in the villages.
Oh, there you go.
I'm friends with him on Facebook, and we chat once in a while.
There you go. And then we talked about from Maine down to your role in at the city down there. So if you were to, what a great, I mean, you basically had two careers, right? So you went through one in 2006 and then had another in city government. What advice would you give yourself if you go back to any time in your career, all the way back to even when you're at West Point, pick a time you would go back, and what advice would you give yourself?
Well, if I go all the way back to plebe year, I would do it again in a heartbeat. And I think many of our classmates would say the same thing. But the advice I would give my grandkids is, life's tough. No one's going to give you anything. You got to roll with the punches and just persevere and keep working at it and working at it and working at it. And eventually, you'll succeed. And when I was working for the City of St. Augustine, I also coached high school girls basketball for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell those players the same thing. Life's not easy.
Right.
You're going to run into some bad bosses. You're going to run into some hurdles. Just work through it. You can do it. Don't give up.
Wise words, right? And you're a testament to that. Jim, thanks so much for joining me today. It was really great to catch up and hear your stories.
Paul, I appreciate you having me again. And go Army, beat Navy.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.